The diner smelled of bacon grease and black coffee, the kind of place where the neon sign outside flickered all night and the jukebox still played old country songs if you fed it a quarter. Harper Lewis wiped her hands on her apron, glancing at the clock above the counter. Nearly 11 a.m., a slow Tuesday morning, regulars sipping coffee, a couple of truckers hunched over pancakes, an old man in the corner reading the New York Post. Nothing unusual until the door opened and a man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped inside. The room seemed to pause. He didn't belong here, not in this greasy spoon tucked off Route 9 in New Jersey. His shoes shone black as mirrors, his silver tie pin glimmered under the fluorescent lights. The truckers exchanged a glance. Harper froze with the coffee pot in her hand. She had seen his face before on magazine covers, on CNBC interviews that played on the muted TV above the bar. Richard Hale, billionaire real estate tycoon. The kind of man who could buy the whole block where the diner stood with pocket change. He slid into a booth by the window as if he owned the place, which in some distant way maybe he did. His eyes swept the diner once, cold and sharp, then landed on Harper. He lifted a hand. Harper forced herself to walk over, pen and pad ready. "Morning, what can I get you today?" she asked, voice steady even as her stomach tightened. Richard leaned back, his expression unreadable. "What's the cheapest meal you've got?" The words hit the air like a slap. The truckers stopped chewing. The old man lowered his newspaper. Even the fry cook behind the counter glanced over his shoulder. Everyone had heard it. The billionaire asking for the cheapest thing on the menu, as if daring the place to prove its worth. Harper blinked, caught off guard. She glanced down at the menu she knew by heart. The cheapest plate was the 2-egg special, 2 eggs any style, toast and coffee. $4.95, a working man's breakfast. But Richard's gaze pinned her, daring, testing. This wasn't about food. For a moment Harper's mind spun. Her rent was overdue, her mother's medical bills were piling higher each month, and here sat a man who could make or break fortunes with a phone call, asking her for the cheapest meal like it was some kind of joke. She swallowed hard, then forced herself to stand tall. She leaned in slightly, voice calm but firm. "Sir, the cheapest meal we've got is 2 eggs, toast, and coffee. But if you're asking what's worth the least, I'd say none of it. Everything on this menu matters to someone. The guy who's been driving since 3 a.m. needs those eggs to get through the day. The grandmother who comes in on Fridays orders pancakes because it's the only time she feels like celebrating. It's not cheap to them, it's priceless." The diner fell silent. Richard's eyebrow arched, a flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossing his face. For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched into a smile. "You're bold," he said. His voice was low, smooth, practiced from years of boardrooms and press conferences. "Most people would have just answered eggs and toast, but you gave me a speech." Harper's chest tightened. "With respect, sir, this place isn't about money. People come here because they want to feel human for a while. Maybe that's something you forgot." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the truckers chuckled into his coffee. The old man folded his paper, nodding slowly as if Harper had said something worth remembering. Richard's gaze sharpened. He tapped a manicured finger against the table, studying her. The silence stretched long enough that Harper began to regret opening her mouth. Then, abruptly, he laughed. "Bring me the eggs and toast, then. Make it quick." "What?" His tone carried the edge of command, but Harper noticed something else too, a crack in the polished armor. A man who wasn't just playing power games, but searching for something he couldn't quite name. She scribbled the order and walked back to the counter, heart pounding. The fry cook, a burly man named Pete, leaned close. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. "I don't know," Harper muttered, sliding the slip onto the spindle, "but I think I just talked back to a billionaire." Pete whistled. "Careful, Harper. Guys like him don't like being told the truth." She knew that, but part of her didn't care. For years, Harper had swallowed her words, keeping her head down, working double shifts to pay the bills. Yet something about Richard's question had lit a fire inside her. Why ask for the cheapest meal unless you wanted to test someone's dignity? As the eggs sizzled on the grill, Harper glanced back. Richard was staring out the window, his jaw tight, hands folded on the table. Not scrolling through his phone, not barking into Bluetooth, just sitting silent, as though the world outside pressed down too heavy. She carried the plate over and set it in front of him. 2 eggs, toast, and coffee, $4.95. Richard didn't touch the food right away. He looked up at her, eyes colder now. "Tell me, waitress, how much do you make here? Minimum wage." The diner's air thickened again. Harper held his gaze, enough to keep going. He smirked. "That's not an answer." No, Harper said softly, but it's the truth. For a heartbeat, something shifted between them. Billionaire and Waitress, two worlds colliding over a plate of eggs. He picked up his fork at last, cutting into the yolk. The yellow spread across the plate like sunlight. The truckers went back to eating, conversation slowly rising again. But Harper knew everyone was still listening, still watching this strange encounter unfold. Richard chewed, swallowed, then nodded once. Not bad, simple, honest. What? Harper crossed her arms, half defensive. Sometimes simple is enough. His eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. Then he set the fork down. We'll see about that. The way he said it made her stomach twist. It wasn't a compliment. It was a challenge. And Harper, against all reason, felt the chill of something bigger beginning. The eggs were half-eaten, the coffee untouched. Richard Hale sat in the corner booth like a king brought low, his tailored suit sharp against the cracked red leather seat. Harper pretended to busy herself wiping counters, but her eyes kept drifting back. Something about him didn't fit. A billionaire could eat anywhere in New York. Why here, in a roadside diner where the heat rattled in the vents and the menu hadn't changed in 20 years? Richard's gaze was far away, fixed on nothing, as though the steam rising from his plate pulled him into some memory he didn't want to revisit. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that his question, "What's the cheapest meal you've got?" hadn't been about food at all. It had been about him. Pete, the fry cook, leaned close. "You sure you didn't piss him off?" he muttered. "Guy like that, he could buy this place and bulldoze it tomorrow." Harper shrugged, though her stomach was tight. Maybe he needed to hear it. Pete barked a laugh. "Yeah, well, I hope you don't regret playing philosopher with a man who owns half of Manhattan." The bell above the door jangled as a young mother entered, tugging a toddler by the hand. They slid into a booth across from Richard's, the child babbling as he waved a plastic fire truck. Harper poured their coffees, grateful for the distraction. But when she returned to the counter, Richard's eyes followed her like shadows. Finally he spoke, his voice cutting across the diner. "You ever wonder why people ask questions they already know the answer to?" The chatter stilled again. Harper turned slowly. His tone wasn't mocking this time. It was almost weary. "Depends," she said cautiously. "Some ask to test you. Some ask because they want to be seen." Richard's eyes narrowed. "And which do you think I am?" She felt every set of eyes in the diner on her. She swallowed hard, then met his gaze. "Maybe both." He gave a humorous chuckle, swirling the black coffee in his cup. "You think you know me. You don't know a damn thing about me." "Then why are you here?" Harper asked quietly. The question seemed to land heavier than she intended. Richard's jaw clenched. For a moment he looked almost human, tired, even broken. But then the mask slid back into place, smooth and cold. "Because I can," he said. "Because I wanted to see what happens when a man like me asks for the cheapest thing in the room." The words cut sharp, but Harper heard the hollowness beneath them. He was baiting her, yes, but there was something else, a challenge to prove him wrong. The toddler across the diner dropped his toy, and it clattered onto the floor. Harper bent to pick it up, handing it back with a smile. The boy's mother mouthed, "Thank you." The small act reminded Harper of what she had said earlier. Simple things weren't cheap. They mattered. Maybe that was exactly what Richard didn't understand, or what he'd forgotten. She straightened and looked back at him. "You want to know what happens when you ask for the cheapest thing? People see you're still human, same as the rest of us." Richard's eyes flared with something she couldn't name. Anger, pain. Before he could reply, Clara Mitchell swept through the diner door like a storm. Heads turned immediately. Clara was impossible to ignore. Long blonde hair, fur-lined coat despite the mild chill outside, diamonds glittering at her ears. She spotted Richard instantly and strutted to his booth, heels clicking against the linoleum. "Darling, really," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "This is where you've been hiding." Richard's lips tightened. "Clara." She slid into the booth beside him, casting a disdainful glance at Harper. "You could be dining at Le Bernardin, and instead you're here, eating eggs on chipped plates." Her laugh carried high and sharp. A couple of regulars exchanged uncomfortable looks. Harper's cheeks flushed, but she forced herself to remain calm. Richard didn't answer. His fork lay abandoned on the plate, yolk congealing in the cold air. Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice but not enough to keep Harper from hearing. "You're wasting time with people who don't matter. Come on, let's get out of here. You've got meetings, remember." Something in Harper snapped. She wasn't supposed to speak. She was a waitress, invisible except when someone wanted coffee refilled. But Clara's words rang in her ears like a slap, not just at her, but at every person in that diner who scraped together $5 for breakfast. Slap, not just at her, but at every person in that diner who scraped together $5 for breakfast. Harper stepped forward, her voice steady. With respect, ma'am, everyone matters, even here. Clara turned slowly, eyes blazing with disbelief. Then she laughed again, crueler this time. Listen to this. The waitress thinks she's a philosopher. What's next, darling? Is she going to teach you how to run your empire with scrambled eggs and burnt toast? The room tensed. The young mother held her child closer. The old man's newspaper trembled in his hands. No one dared breathe. Harper's pulse pounded, but she stood her ground. Maybe he doesn't need lessons in business. Maybe he needs a reminder of what's real. Richard's expression flickered. For the briefest second, the armor cracked again, and Harper saw something raw in his eyes. Then Clara's nails grazed his sleeve, pulling him back. Enough of this nonsense, Clara hissed. Let's go. But Richard didn't move. He just stared at Harper, silent, as though she had struck a chord too deep to ignore. The bell above the door jangled again, but no one turned to look. All eyes were locked on the billionaire, the mistress, and the waitress who had dared to speak. Richard finally pushed back his cup, the coffee still untouched. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate, and slipped a $100 bill onto the table. The bill looked absurd against the $4.95 plate of eggs. Without another word, he walked toward the door. Clara scrambled after him, her heels clacking. Richard, don't tell me you're letting some waitress get under your skin. The door slammed behind them, leaving silence in their wake. Harper stood frozen, her chest heaving. She hadn't meant to cause a scene, hadn't meant to speak truth to a man who could destroy lives with a signature, but she had. Pete muttered under his breath, "Girl, you just poked the biggest bear in Manhattan." The young mother smiled faintly. No, she just reminded him he's human. Oh, Harper sank onto a stool behind the counter, trembling. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. Richard Hale had come looking for the cheapest meal. Instead, he'd found something he hadn't bargained for, truth he couldn't ignore. And Harper, against all odds, had just stepped onto a battlefield she never asked for. The diner buzzed with leftover tension even after Richard and Clara stormed out. Forks scraped plates again, conversations picked up in hushed tones, but every customer kept glancing at Harper as if she had suddenly become larger than life. She tried to steady her hands while pouring coffee, but inside her pulse hammered. What had she done? Speaking truth to a billionaire was reckless. Speaking it in front of his mistress, suicidal. Pete slid a plate of pancakes onto the counter, his voice low. Harper, I don't know if you just made history or signed your own death warrant. She managed a weak smile, maybe both. Well, but beneath the humor was fear. Richard Hale wasn't the kind of man to forget a slight. She had seen his name splashed across business magazines, stories about hostile takeovers and ruthless buyouts. If he could destroy corporations, what chance did a waitress have? She shook off the thought and carried the pancakes to the young mother's booth. The toddler clapped his sticky hands, delighted. That at least made Harper's heart soften. Here was something simple, untainted. Yet the peace didn't last. By evening the diner had emptied, and Harper scrubbed tables with mechanical precision. She glanced out the window at the winter dusk settling over Route 9. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun. Just a waitress, just a nobody. The bell above the door jingled again. Her stomach dropped. Clara Mitchell had returned. She wasn't alone. Two women trailed behind her, both draped in designer coats, their laughter sharp as glass. They didn't belong in this diner any more than a diamond necklace belonged in a pawnshop. Clara spotted Harper and smirked. Well, well, if it isn't the philosopher waitress. The other women tittered. One lifted her phone, already recording. Harper forced herself to stay calm. Can I help you ladies? Oh, we don't need help, Clara purred, sliding into the same booth Richard had occupied that morning. We're just here for some entertainment. Her friends giggled again. The phone's red recording light blinked. Harper's chest tightened. She knew what this was, humiliation theater. Clara hadn't come back for food. She'd come back for revenge. So, Clara said, her voice loud enough to carry, this is where you deliver your little speeches about dignity and humanity, to truckers and single moms. The woman snorted, Harper's fists clenched at her sides, but she refused to give Clara the satisfaction of a reaction. Tell us, Clara pressed, eyes gleaming. Do you really believe a $5 plate of eggs is priceless, or was that just a performance to impress Richard? Her friends cackled, one whispering, "Wait till TikTok sees this." The humiliation seared Harper's skin. She wanted to snap back to defend herself, but the phone recording made every word dangerous. Clara leaned forward, her tone venomous. "Newsflash, sweetheart. Men like Richard don't learn from waitresses. They use them. They step over them. That's how the world works." Harper's throat burned, but she stood her ground. "If that's how you see the world, maybe that's why you'll never change it." For a heartbeat, Clara's smirk faltered. Then she laughed, tossing her hair. "Adorable. She thinks she's a revolutionary. Record that line, girls. It'll make a great meme." The phone zoomed closer. Harper's cheeks flamed. She wanted to disappear, but her voice betrayed her heart. "This diner is full of people who work harder in a day than you do in a month. If that makes them less valuable to you, that says more about you than them." The laughter wavered. Clara's eyes narrowed, icy. "Careful, darling. Words like that can ruin you. Ask anyone who's crossed Richard Hale. They don't last long." Her friends giggled nervously, but Harper caught the flicker of insecurity in their eyes. Maybe even they weren't sure where Clara's cruelty ended. Pete emerged from the kitchen, dish towel in hand. "You ladies planning to order or just film harassment for dessert?" Clara rolled her eyes. "Relax, chef. We'll be gone soon. I just wanted to remind our dear waitress here where she stands." She slid out of the booth, her entourage following. At the door she paused, phone still recording. "Enjoy your kingdom, Harper, this greasy little castle of yours, because in the real world, people like you don't matter." The bell jingled as they left, their laughter echoing in the night. Harper sagged against the counter, breath shuddering. Pete muttered curses under his breath. "What a piece of work. Don't let her get to you, Harper. She's just noise." But Harper knew better. That video was already on its way to the internet, and once something spread online, there was no pulling it back. She dragged herself home that night, the cold biting through her thin coat. Their small apartment smelled faintly of chamomile and antiseptic, her mother's world now, fragile and quiet. Harper checked on her, adjusting the blanket over her frail shoulders. Her mother stirred, murmuring, "Long day." Harper kissed her forehead. "Yeah, just a long day." She didn't mention Clara or Richard, or the phone pointed at her like a weapon. What good would it do? Her mother had enough worries without adding billionaires and mistresses to the list. But when Harper finally lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, her phone buzzed. Dozens of notifications fluttered her screen. Mentions, tags, comments. Her heart plummeted. The video was already viral. The clip showed Clara mocking her, Harper responding with trembling but firm words about dignity. The caption read, "Waitress lectures billionaire's mistress, savage or stupid." The comments split like fire through dry grass. "Queen energy, respect." "She's gonna get fired tomorrow." "Who talks back to Richard Hale's people, rip her career." Finally, someone telling the rich the truth. Harper's hands shook as she scrolled, thousands of views already. By morning it would be millions. And somewhere in a Manhattan penthouse, Richard Hale was probably watching too. Morning sunlight spilled across Harper's small bedroom, but she didn't feel its warmth. Her phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand, each vibration another reminder that her life was no longer her own. She groaned, dragging the blanket over her head, but the buzzing wouldn't stop. Finally, she grabbed the phone. Her screen glowed with hundreds of notifications, mentions, reposts, articles. She rubbed her eyes and clicked one at random. "Waitress stands up to billionaire's mistress. The internet has opinions." Her stomach flipped. Beneath the headline was a still image of her face from the diner, flushed but determined. Clara sneered beside her. The caption read, "Not all heroes wear capes, some wear aprons." Harper sat up, her breath shallow. This couldn't be real. She was just a waitress. She wasn't supposed to be trending worldwide. From the kitchen came the faint clink of dishes. Her mother was awake, humming softly to herself. Harper shoved the phone under her pillow and forced her feet to the floor. She couldn't let her mom see any of this. The woman had enough stress without worrying her daughter had become social media's latest obsession. Still, the world outside already knew. By the time Harper stepped into the diner for her shift, reporters were waiting. Cameras clicked, microphones shoved toward her face. "Harper, do you really believe your words can change how billionaires treat the working class? Did you plan that speech, or was it spontaneous? Has Richard Hale contacted you?" The questions blurred together in a dizzying storm. Pete barreled out of the kitchen like a linebacker, waving his spatula like a weapon. "Back off, vultures. This ain't a press conference, it's breakfast." He shoved the crowd aside long enough for Harper to slip inside, heart hammering. She ducked behind the counter, clutching her apron strings. Pete glared at her. "Told you this would happen. You poked a bear, and now the whole damn forest's on fire." Harper swallowed. "I didn't mean for it to blow up." Pete softened, shaking his head. "Kid, the internet doesn't care what you mean. Once they smell a story, it's theirs, not yours anymore." He was right. Harper could feel the weight of it pressing in, the millions of strangers dissecting her words, her face, her life. But somewhere across the city, the story was hitting harder. In a glass-walled penthouse high above Manhattan, Richard Hale stood at the window, his phone in hand. Below, the city stretched like a kingdom he owned, but today it felt like a battlefield turning against him. The video played again on his screen. Clara's shrill laugh, Harper's steady defiance. The moment replayed endlessly online, each share another nail in the coffin of his carefully crafted image. He tossed the phone onto the leather sofa, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. Clara appeared from the bedroom, draped in silk, holding her own phone. "Richard," she drawled, "have you seen what they're saying? She made you look weak. Some waitress with an apron is trending higher than you." Richard's jaw tightened. "Drop it, Clara." She smirked. "Or what? You'll buy the internet and delete it." He turned sharply, his eyes like steel. "I said drop it." For once Clara obeyed, but the smirk never left her face. Meanwhile, the diner buzzed with more customers than Harper had ever seen. People weren't just coming for breakfast, they were coming for her. "Are you the waitress from the video?" a college kid asked, holding up his phone for a selfie. "You're amazing," said a woman in scrubs, handing Harper a 20 for a $5 meal. "Don't ever let them silence you." Harper forced a smile, but each compliment felt heavier. She wasn't a hero. She was a waitress who'd spoken her mind. Now the world was building her into something she wasn't sure she could be. At a corner booth, two men in suits whispered, one pointing toward Harper. She recognized the type, reporters, maybe bloggers. They didn't see her as a person. She was content, a headline, a trend to exploit. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders. She slipped out the back door for air, the cold wind biting her cheeks. Her phone buzzed again, a new notification. She hesitated, then opened it. An email from an unknown sender. "We should talk. I know the truth about Richard Hale. Meet me." Attached was a single address, a small cafe in the East Village. Harper's pulse quickened. Who is this? What truth? Was it bait, or was someone else playing a bigger game? She tucked the phone into her apron, unsettled. She had no intention of meeting strangers in the city. She just wanted her life back. But deep down, she knew it was too late. The story had already chosen her. That night, Harper sat on her fire escape, staring at the city lights. Her mother slept peacefully inside, unaware of the storm raging online. Harper scrolled through comments again. Some were supportive. "She's the voice of the working class." Finally, someone standing up to billionaires. But others cut sharp. "She's milking her 15 minutes of fame." "She's nothing but a waitress. Why should anyone care what she says?" Her chest ached. She wasn't chasing fame. She hadn't asked for the spotlight. Yet here it was, scorching her from every angle. Somewhere Richard Hale was watching too. Maybe he was plotting revenge. Maybe he was remembering what she'd said about dignity. Either way, their lives were now tangled in a web neither could escape. A siren wailed in the distance. The city pulsed, indifferent. Harper wrapped her arms around herself, whispering into the night, "What happens when the spark turns into a fire?" The answer was coming, and she knew it wouldn't be gentle. The diner hadn't stopped buzzing for days. Customers poured in like never before, curious strangers, journalists, even influencers hoping to snag a quick video with the waitress who stood up to a billionaire. For Harper, the attention was suffocating. Each shift felt like a performance, every smile scrutinized, every word recorded. Even her tips felt heavier. People weren't tipping for service anymore. They were tipping for the viral symbol she had accidentally become. Pete tried to lighten the mood, sliding a plate of fries toward her during a break. "Look at it this way," he said. "At least your face is everywhere. Not many waitresses can say that." Harper managed a laugh, but her stomach twisted. Fame wasn't freedom. Fame was a cage. That night, as she walked home through the bitter wind, her phone buzzed again. She almost ignored it, expecting another wave of mentions or cruel comments, but this message froze her in place. It wasn't from a stranger, it was from him. Richard Hale. You've caused quite a storm, Miss Lewis. Meet me tomorrow, the Waldorf, 8 p.m. Don't be late. Her hands shook as she read the words. He wasn't asking, he was summoning her. The next day, Harper sat across from her brother Ethan in a crowded coffee shop. The message pulled up on her phone. Ethan, a mechanical engineer with grease still under his nails, frowned at the glowing screen. Harper, this is a trap. Guys like Hale don't invite people. They lure them in. You're walking straight into his world, where he holds all the power. I know, Harper whispered, but if I don't go, it looks like I'm afraid. And if I'm afraid, maybe that means he wins already. Ethan shook his head. You don't owe him anything. You stood up for yourself. That should have been the end of it. It's not the end, she said quietly. Not anymore. She remembered the anonymous email she'd gotten, claiming to know the truth about Richard Hale. The timing gnawed at her. What if this meeting wasn't just about intimidation? What if it was her chance to see who Richard really was? Ethan reached across the table, gripping her hand. Promise me you'll be careful. If anything feels off, walk out. I promise, but inside she wasn't sure she could. The Waldorf's grand lobby gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble. Harper's thrift store dress and worn shoes felt like an insult to the space itself. She clutched her coat tighter, wishing she could melt into the shadows. But Richard's assistant, a tall man in a black suit, spotted her immediately. Miss Lewis, this way. He led her past velvet ropes and gold elevators to a private ballroom. The doors opened, and Harper's breath caught. It wasn't just Richard waiting inside. The room buzzed with Manhattan's elite, bankers, CEOs, socialites. Crystal glasses clinked, diamonds glittered, laughter floated like smoke, and in the center, commanding the room like a general on the battlefield, stood Richard Hale. He was speaking with a senator, his hand resting casually on a glass of scotch, but when he saw Harper, his smile sharpened. The crowd parted as though rehearsed, leaving a clear path straight to him. Miss Lewis, Richard said, his voice carrying just enough to silence nearby conversations. So glad you could join us. Every head turned, whispers rippled like electricity. Harper felt her face flush. She wasn't a guest, she was a spectacle. I didn't realize this was a party, Harper said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. Richard's smile widened. Everything I do is a party. Clara appeared at his side, draped in emerald silk, her eyes glittering with venom. Well, well, the philosopher waitress in the flesh. Welcome to the real world, darling. Try not to spill anything. The crowd chuckled softly, some with pity, others with amusement. Harper's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stand tall. Richard gestured toward a nearby table. Come, eat. You've already proven you can speak to me in public. Let's see if you can sit at my table. The implication wasn't lost on anyone. This wasn't hospitality. This was a test. Dinner unfolded like theater. Waiters in white gloves served foie gras and truffle risotto while Harper sat among titans of industry. Every eye lingered on her, some curious, some hostile. So one banker sneered, swirling his wine. You believe scrambled eggs have more value than $1 million deal. The table laughed. Harper swallowed, then answered, I believe people are worth more than either. The laughter dimmed, replaced by raised brows. Even Richard's smile flickered. But Clara leaned forward, her tone saccharine. How precious. You see, darling, in our world, value is measured by deals, by power, by who wins. In who loses? Harper asked. Clara's lips curled. Everyone else. The table chuckled again, but Richard raised his hand. The laughter died instantly. His eyes locked on Harper's. Tell me, Miss Lewis, do you really think your words matter in this room, that you can waltz in here in that dress and shame us into humanity? The challenge cut deep, but Harper refused to flinch. Maybe I can't change everyone, but I can remind you that the world doesn't begin and end in rooms like this. What? The silence that followed was sharp, broken only by the clink of a glass somewhere in the distance. For the first time, Richard didn't smirk. He studied her like a puzzle, as though trying to decide whether to crush her or listen. After dinner, Clara cornered Harper near the bar. Enjoy, Richard's just entertaining himself. He'll toss you aside like the rest of us. Her words stung, but Harper saw something beneath the venom, fear. Clara wasn't just cruel, she was desperate. Desperate to keep her place beside a man who could replace her with a snap of his fingers. Harper stepped closer, lowering her voice. If he's really yours, why are you so afraid of me? Clara's eyes blazed, but before she could reply, Richard appeared. He placed a hand on Harper's shoulder, guiding her away. You did well tonight, he murmured. Most people would have drowned. You swam. I wasn't here to impress you, Harper said. Of course not, he replied smoothly, but you impress me anyway. His words lingered as he turned back to his guests, leaving Harper shaken. Outside, the city roared with traffic and neon. Harper clutched her coat, her brother's warning echoing in her mind. This wasn't over. Tonight had been the opening move in a game she didn't understand, and somewhere in the shadows, the anonymous message about Richard's truth still waited. The spark was growing, and Harper was no longer just a waitress. She was a piece on Richard Hale's board, whether she wanted to be or not. The invitation arrived 2 days later, delivered in a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold. Harper almost didn't open it, assuming it was another reporter fishing for a headline, but when she slit the seal, her breath caught. Mr. Richard Hale requests the honor of your presence at the Hale Foundation Winter Gala, Waldorf Astoria, formal attire required. Harper's stomach dropped. This wasn't just dinner. This was the event of the season, where Manhattan's elite gathered under crystal chandeliers to parade their wealth and power. And Richard was inviting her, no, summoning her, into the lion's den. Ethan slammed the envelope down on the diner counter when she showed him. Absolutely not, Harper, this is madness. He's putting you on display. He wants to prove you don't belong. I know, Harper said quietly, but maybe that's exactly why I have to go. The night of the gala, Harper stood in front of a cracked mirror in her small apartment. She wore a simple black dress borrowed from a neighbor, its hem slightly uneven. No jewels, no designer heels, just dignity. She smoothed her hair back, kissed her mother's forehead, and whispered, I'll be back late, don't worry about me. Her mother stirred, murmuring, Be careful, sweetheart. Harper's chest ached, but she forced herself out the door. The Waldorf glittered like a palace. Guests in gowns and tuxedos poured into the ballroom, their laughter bouncing off marble floors and gilded ceilings. A string quartet played softly beneath chandeliers that dripped light like liquid gold. Harper stepped inside, clutching her small thrift store clutch. The stares were immediate, sharp as knives. Whispers rippled across the room. Is that her? The waitress. She looks ordinary. Clara appeared almost instantly, her emerald gown hugging her figure, her diamonds blazing under the lights. She swept across the floor like a queen and blocked Harper's path with a smirk. Well, well, Clara purred, her voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to hear. The philosopher of scrambled eggs has arrived. Tell me, darling, are you planning to give another sermon tonight, or will you dazzle us all with tales of hash browns and bottomless coffee? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Harper's face burned, but she forced herself to stand tall. I came because I was invited. If that bothers you, maybe that says more about you than me. Clara's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. How precious. Let's see how long you last before Richard realizes you're just another charity case. Dinner was served on long banquet tables lined with crystal glassware and golden plates. Harper sat near the end, surrounded by strangers in designer suits. She could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up, waiting for her to slip. The meal began with caviar and lobster bisque. Harper stared at the tiny portion in front of her, fighting the urge to laugh. Back at the diner, a trucker's breakfast could feed a man for a day. Here, a spoonful of soup was served with a flourish. Across the table, Clara raised her glass. A toast, she announced, her voice sweet but laced with poison, to Richard Hale for reminding us all that generosity extends even to the less fortunate among us. The room chuckled, glasses clinked. Harper's hands clenched under the tablecloth. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. The room fell silent, every eye turned toward her. If generosity means inviting someone just to humiliate them, Harper said, her voice trembling but steady, then maybe you don't understand generosity at all. Gasps rippled across the room. Clara's smile curdled into rage. How dare you? But Harper pressed on. I may not wear diamonds, I may not sit on boards or sign million-dollar deals, but I know what it means to work until your hands ache. I know what it means to take care of someone you love, even when the world forgets you exist. That's value, that's humanity, and you can't put a price tag on it. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet had faltered, their bows frozen midair. Richard Hale rose from his seat at the head table, his expression unreadable. He studied Harper for a long moment, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her like a spotlight. Then slowly he began to clap. The sound echoed through the ballroom. A few scattered guests joined in, hesitant at first, then louder. Others remained stone-faced, their smiles brittle, unwilling to break rank. But the applause grew until the room buzzed with uneasy energy. Clara's face burned crimson. She slammed her glass down, the stem shattering against the table. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "She's nothing." Her voice cracked with desperation, but the crowd had already turned. For the first time, Clara wasn't in control. Harper's heart pounded. She hadn't planned to speak. She hadn't wanted to, but the words had spilled out like a dam breaking, and now there was no going back. Later that evening, as guests drifted toward the dance floor, Richard approached Harper. He looked strangely different under the chandelier light, not the untouchable titan of real estate, but a man carrying something heavy in his chest. "You have courage," he said softly. "Most people in that room would rather starve than risk looking weak." Harper met his gaze. "It's not courage, it's survival. When you've been invisible your whole life, you stop being afraid of being seen." For the first time, Richard didn't smirk. He looked almost moved. But before he could reply, Clara reappeared, her fury simmering like a storm. "She's using you, Richard," Clara spat. "Don't you see? She's enjoying every second of this attention. She's making a fool of you." Richard's jaw tightened. "Enough, Clara." Her eyes widened. "You're actually listening to her." "She's the only one who's spoken truth in that room all night," he said. The words hung between them like thunder. Clara's face twisted with rage. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the ballroom, the crowd parting silently to let her pass. The night ended with whispers echoing through the marble halls. Some praised Harper's boldness, others seized at her audacity. But one thing was certain, she had shifted the balance of the evening. As she stepped out into the cold night air, Harper's breath clouded against the Manhattan skyline. Her phone buzzed again with another message. This time it was Richard. "You made waves tonight. The truth about Hal runs deeper than you think. Meet me soon." Harper's pulse quickened. Whoever was sending these messages wasn't done, and neither, it seemed, was she. The spark had become a flame, and the fire was only getting started. The days after the gala blurred into a whirlwind. News outlets replayed Harper's speech on every channel. Clips flooded social media, each one captioned with bold headlines. "Waitress challenges Manhattan elite." "David Varsy. Goliath Harper Lewis stuns Richard Hale's gala." "Truth bomb at the Waldorf." For Harper it was dizzying. She still clocked in at the diner, pouring coffee and serving pancakes, but now every customer stared like they were meeting a celebrity. She hated it. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to survive. Yet she couldn't shake what had happened that night, the way Richard had looked at her, the cracks in his polished facade, the flicker of something human beneath the billionaire armor. So when her phone buzzed with a private message from him, she froze. "Meet me midnight Central Park. No cameras, no audience, just us." Harper stared at the screen, heart hammering. She should say no, she should walk away. But curiosity nodded her, louder than fear. The park was quiet under a veil of snow, lamplight casting long shadows across the frozen paths. Harper pulled her coat tighter, her breath fogging in the air. When Richard appeared, he didn't look like the man from glossy magazines. No tuxedo, no entourage, just a long wool coat, his hair damp from snowflakes, his face weary. "You came," he said, his voice low. "I shouldn't have," Harper replied, "but here I am." They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps crunching in the snow. Finally, Richard stopped near the frozen lake, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "You think I'm a monster," he said flatly. Harper hesitated. "I think you're a man who forgot what it's like to be hungry." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "Funny thing is, I never forgot. I grew up hungry." Harper blinked. "What?" He stared at the ice, his jaw tight. "South Bronx, one-bedroom apartment. My father left when I was 7. My mother worked 3 jobs, and still there were nights when dinner was a slice of bread with butter. I used to dream about diners like yours, with plates full of food I couldn't afford." Harper's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this. Richard continued, his voice rough. "When I asked you for the cheapest meal, it wasn't a game. Not really, it was memory.
I wanted to see if it still tasted the same, if I could go back even for a minute. For the first time, Harper saw him not as a billionaire, but as a boy, hungry, desperate, building walls so high no one could see inside. Then why hide it, she asked softly. Why act like money is all that matters? His eyes flicked to hers, dark and haunted. Because the world only respects power. When I was poor, people stepped over me. When I became rich, they finally looked me in the eye. I swore I'd never be invisible again. Harper swallowed hard, but in chasing that, you became the very thing that once crushed you. Richard didn't answer. The silence between them was heavy, thick with truths neither wanted to confront. Then a voice cut through the night. Well, isn't this touching? Harper spun around. Clara emerged from the shadows, her heels crunching in the snow, her fur coat blazing against the white. In her hand, a phone glowed, recording. Clara, Richard snapped. What the hell are you doing here? Catching you in the act, she sneered. Pouring your little sob story to a waitress while the world thinks you're untouchable. Do you know what this is worth, Richard? Headlines, scandal, power. Harper's stomach dropped. Clara hadn't just followed them. She was broadcasting his confession. Richard stepped forward, fury blazing in his eyes. Turn it off, now. Clara laughed, sharp and cruel. Or what, you'll buy me out like you buy everyone else, not this time. You've been hiding skeletons for years, Richard, deals, bribes, little secrets tucked away. Maybe it's time the world saw the man behind the empire. Harper's blood ran cold. You planned this. You wanted him vulnerable. Clara's eyes flicked to her. And you handed him to me on a silver platter. Congratulations, sweetheart. You're the bait. The words sliced through Harper like ice. She realized too late Richard wasn't the only one playing games. She had walked straight into Clara's trap. Richard's fists clenched at his sides. You think you can destroy me with a video? Clara smirked, not just a video, a movement. People are already obsessed with her. She jabbed a manicured finger toward Harper. And when they see their shiny new working-class hero tangled up with a corrupt billionaire, they'll eat you alive. Harper's knees trembled. This isn't about me. This is about you. No, Clara hissed. This is about winning, and I don't lose. She turned, striding toward the street where a sleek black car waited, phone still recording. Clara, Richard roared, his voice echoing through the frozen park, but she didn't look back. Harper's breath came in shallow bursts. The truth was out there now, weaponized. Clara had drawn first blood, and neither of them could stop it. Richard sank onto a bench, his shoulders heavy. For once, he looked utterly broken. It's over, he muttered. She's going to ruin me. Harper sat beside him, her own fear gnawing at her. Then fight back, not with money, not with power, with truth. He laughed bitterly. Truth doesn't save men like me. Maybe it can, she said quietly, if you let it. For a long time, Richard didn't speak. The snow fell around them, muffling the world. Harper realized this was the turning point, the moment where he would either collapse under Clara's betrayal or rise with the scars of his past. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. By morning, the city was already on fire. The video spread like a virus, Clara's voice sharp, Richard's confession raw, Harper's stunned face caught in the glow of the street lamps. Headlines screamed across every platform. Richard Hale exposed, Billionaire's hidden past and secret meetings. What? From power to pity, Hale caught in tearful admission. Waitress at the center of Manhattan meltdown. Harper stared at her phone, her coffee growing cold on the diner counter. She scrolled through the comments, her chest tightening. He's finished, about time. Fake sob story, he's just scared of losing money. Harper's a fraud too, she's in on it. Powerful men crying poor, please spare me. Her throat ached. This wasn't what she wanted. She hadn't asked to be anyone's pawn, but Clara had turned her into a weapon and the internet was sharpening its blade. Pete slammed the radio off in the kitchen, his face grim. It's everywhere. Wall Street, Washington, every damn bar in Jersey. They're tearing him apart. Harper whispered, and me with him. Meanwhile, in the glass tower that bore his name, Richard Hale sat slumped in a leather chair. The office that once radiated power now felt like a tomb. His phone buzzed nonstop, investors, board members, lawyers, but he didn't pick up. The TV across the room replayed Clara's video. His own voice echoed back at him. I grew up hungry. I swore I'd never be invisible again. He hurled a crystal glass at the screen. It shattered, the pieces glittering on the floor like fragments of his empire. His assistant, pale and trembling, stepped inside. "Sir, the board has called an emergency meeting. They're demanding answers. Stocks are already down 12%. Richard didn't move. "Tell them I'll be there." "Sir." I said I'll be there. His voice was steel, but his hands shook as he poured another drink. By afternoon, the diner was swarmed, not with customers this time, but with reporters. Cameras flashed through the windows, microphones pushed against the glass. "Harper, did you know about Richard's past? Are you in a relationship with him? Did you set him up with Clara Mitchell?" Harper ducked behind the counter, her heart pounding. "Pete, I can't do this. I can't breathe." He scowled, grabbing a broom as if it were a weapon. "Out, out, all of you. This is a diner, not a circus." The reporters scattered reluctantly, shouting more questions as they left. Harper buried her face in her hands. She didn't care about Richard's empire, his stock prices, or his board meetings, but she couldn't escape the tidal wave Clara had unleashed. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a new message. "Meet me tonight, one chance to end this. R." Harper stared at the screen. Despite everything, he was reaching out, and against her better judgment, part of her wanted to go. That evening, Richard stood in the middle of his penthouse living room, the skyline of Manhattan blazing beyond the glass walls. He looked older, the weight of the scandal etched into every line of his face. When Harper entered, escorted by his assistant, he didn't look at her right away. He poured a drink, then set it down untouched. "They're circling," he said finally. "Investors, politicians, journalists, everyone wants blood," and Clara handed them the knife. Harper's voice was quiet, so fight back, tell the truth before she twists it even more. He gave a hollow laugh. "The truth, that I clawed my way out of poverty, built an empire, and became the very monster I swore I'd never be. That's not truth, it's suicide." "Maybe it's survival," Harper countered. "You can't outspend this, you can't intimidate it. The only way out is through." Richard turned then, his eyes blazing. "And what about you, Harper? Do you realize what you've gotten yourself into? Clara's painting you as my accomplice. You'll be dragged through the mud right beside me." Her hands trembled, but she held his gaze. "I didn't ask for any of this, but I'm not going to run. I survived worse than hashtags and headlines. What about you?" For a moment, the fire in his eyes dimmed. He looked at her with something that almost resembled respect. The board meeting the next morning was a bloodbath. Richard sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his empire's leaders flanking him like vultures. Charts projected falling stocks, headlines blared from tablets, and every face radiated hostility. "This is untenable," one board member snapped. "Your personal scandal is dragging us down." "You've lost the media, you've lost public trust," another chimed in. "Step aside, Richard. Resign before we force you out." Richard's jaw clenched. For years he had ruled this room with an iron hand. Now they circled him like sharks smelling blood. Harper's words echoed in his mind. The only way out is through. For the first time, Richard didn't bark orders or throw threats. He leaned forward, voice low but steady. "I made mistakes. I built walls instead of bridges. I lost sight of where I came from. That's on me. But I won't resign. I'll rebuild, with or without your approval." The room erupted in outrage, but somewhere in the chaos, Richard felt a strange calm. For once, he wasn't hiding. Outside, Harper sat on a park bench, scrolling through her phone. Clara was everywhere: interviews, podcasts, glossy photo shoots, smirking as she spun the scandal into her own brand of power. "She's enjoying this," Harper muttered. "She doesn't care who burns as long as she shines." A man in a dark coat slid onto the bench beside her. She stiffened, but he spoke before she could move. "You don't know me," he said, handing her a folded envelope, "but I know Richard Hale, and I know what Clara really did." Her pulse quickened as she opened the envelope. Inside were documents, contracts, wire transfers, emails, evidence of Clara's dealings. The man stood, fading into the crowd. "Use it wisely. The collapse isn't his, it's hers." Harper stared at the papers, the city's noise fading into silence. The fire Clara had started wasn't finished, but maybe, just maybe, Harper now held the match that could turn it back on her. The city pulsed with scandal. Clara's face was everywhere, smiling in designer gowns, giving interviews on late-night talk shows, playing the role of...
But Harper knew better. She had the documents in her hands, proof that Clara wasn't a hero. She was a parasite, feeding on the empire she now pretended to expose. Sitting in the back booth of the diner, Harper spread the papers across the table. Wire transfers, shell companies, Clara's signature tied to shady deals that would ruin her credibility if they ever saw the light. Pete wiped his hands on his apron and peered over her shoulder. That looks like dynamite, Harper. Light the fuse and someone's going to blow. I don't want to destroy people, Harper said softly, but Clara's already destroying us, Richard, me, this place. Pete grunted. Sometimes you don't get to choose the fight, sometimes it chooses you. Meanwhile, Richard was unraveling. His penthouse felt more like a prison now, reporters stationed outside, helicopters buzzing overhead. Inside, he wandered through his empire of glass and steel like a ghost. Once this place had symbolized victory, now it felt hollow, mocking. The stock freefall continued, investors withdrew, board members whispered about replacing him. And every time Richard looked at a screen, there was Clara, mocking, smirking, painting him as weak and corrupt. For a man who had spent his life building walls, it was the first time he felt them crashing down. And then Harper arrived. She stood in his doorway, clutching the envelope of evidence. Richard's eyes flicked to it, then to her face. "What's that?" "Your way out," she said, "or Clara's way down, maybe both." She laid the documents on the table. He scanned them, his expression shifting from disbelief to fury to grim realization. "She's been stealing from me," he muttered. "While she stood on TV calling me a monster, she was pocketing money from my own companies." "Then tell the truth," Harper said, "not just about her, about everything." Richard's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. If I expose her, I expose myself. Every shady deal, every backroom handshake, it all comes spilling out." Harper leaned closer. "Then maybe it's time. Maybe the reckoning isn't just hers, it's yours too." For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then he looked at her with something almost like fear. "If I do this, I lose everything." "No," Harper whispered. "If you don't, you lose yourself." The next day, the world watched as Richard Hay strode onto a stage in a crowded press hall. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Clara sat smugly in the front row, certain of her victory. Richard adjusted the microphone. His suit was sharp, but his face was tired, human. For once, there was no smirk. "I built an empire," he began, his voice steady. "And in building it, I lost sight of who I was. I cut corners. I made deals I regret. I let ambition blind me." Gasps rippled through the room. Clara leaned forward, her smile widening. But Richard continued, his eyes locking on hers. "I wasn't alone in my corruption. Clara Mitchell, who claims to expose me, was stealing from the very empire she now pretends to condemn." He held up the documents. "Here is proof, wire transfers, contracts, her signature. While she mocked me, she lined her pockets with the same greed she accused me of." Clara shot to her feet, face red. "Lies, he's desperate." The cameras turned to her, flashes popping like fireworks. Reporters shouted questions, shoving microphones in her direction. Her smirk crumbled, replaced by panic. Richard's voice cut through the chaos. "I won't pretend I'm innocent. I was wrong. I let power consume me. But I will not let a parasite destroy what I've built for her own gain. If I fall, I'll fall telling the truth." The room erupted. Clara tried to push past the reporters, but they swarmed her, waving the evidence in her face. Her diamonds glittered under the lights, but for the first time she looked small. Hours later, Harper sat in the diner watching the coverage. Clara was trending worldwide again, but this time not as a whistleblower, as a fraud. Headlines screamed. Clara Mitchell caught in her own lies. From mistress to manipulator, the frolic Clara. Waitress and Billionaire strike back. Harper exhaled, relief washing over her, but she knew it wasn't victory, not yet. The door jangled and Richard walked in. No entourage, no cameras, just him. He slid into a booth, his shoulders heavy. Pete raised an eyebrow from the counter. "Big shot billionaire in my diner twice in a month. Must be the apocalypse." But Harper didn't laugh. She carried over a plate, the cheapest meal on the menu. Eggs, toast, coffee. She set it in front of Richard without a word. He stared at it, his hands trembling slightly. Slowly, he picked up the fork, cutting into the yolk. "This was my first meal after my mother lost her job," he said quietly. "A diner just like this one, 2 eggs and toast. I told myself I'd never eat it again once I made it out. Too much pain tied to it." Harper sat across from him. "Sometimes the things that break us are the same things that save us." For the first time, Richard didn't argue. He ate in silence, each bite heavy with memory. The billionaire who once mocked her diner now sat humbled, reminded of the boy he used to be. Outside, the city kept roaring. Clara's downfall dominated the headlines, her once bright star burning out in real time. But inside the diner, something quieter unfolded. Not power, not scandal, humanity. Richard Hale was no longer untouchable. He was just a man with a plate of eggs, sitting across from the waitress who refused to let him forget his own humanity. And for the first time in his life, Richard didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The storm had finally broken. Clara Mitchell vanished from headlines almost as quickly as she had dominated them. The evidence against her spread like wildfire: articles, leaked contracts, even footage of her dodging reporters while shouting "no comment." Overnight, the woman who had once smirked her way into the spotlight became a cautionary tale. Richard Hale, however, wasn't free of consequence. His confession had rattled the business world. The board pushed him out, investors fled, and magazines that once called him a visionary now labeled him a fallen king. But oddly, Richard didn't resist. He accepted the collapse with a grim dignity, as if for the first time losing power didn't feel like death. For Harper, life didn't return to normal, but it softened. The diner buzzed again, not with reporters, but with neighbors who smiled knowingly, treating her not as a symbol, but as a friend. The cameras had moved on. The frenzy had shifted to another scandal, and in that quiet, Harper began to breathe again. One evening, as snow drifted outside and neon lights buzzed faintly in the diner's window, Richard walked in. No suit, no entourage, just a man in a simple coat, carrying himself without the armor of wealth. Harper looked up from behind the counter. "Didn't expect to see you again." Richard offered a tired smile. "Where else would I go?" Pete muttered from the kitchen, "Careful, Hale. You're going to start looking like a regular." Richard chuckled softly, then slid into his usual booth, the same one where it had all begun. Harper walked over with her pad, though she didn't need it. "The cheapest meal?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. He nodded. "Always." "What?" As Pete cooked in the back, Harper sat across from him, curiosity gnawing at her. "So what now? No board, no empire, no Clara." Richard leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "For the first time in decades, I don't know, and maybe that's good." "That doesn't scare you." "Terrifies me," he admitted, "but I spent my whole life running from fear. Maybe it's time to sit with it." Harper studied him. He looked older, yes, but lighter somehow, like a man finally free of chains he'd mistaken for crowns. When Pete set the plate down, 2 eggs, toast, coffee, Richard stared at it for a long moment, then he picked up the fork. "It still tastes the same," he murmured, "but I'm different." Weeks passed. Richard returned to the diner often, sometimes alone, sometimes with community organizers or local leaders. He began donating, not in flashy galas or photo ops, but quietly, directly to shelters and food banks. The world didn't hail him as a hero. In fact, many still mocked him, some refused to forgive, but Richard didn't seem to care. His empire was gone, but his humanity had returned. In Harper, she found herself at the center of something unexpected. People wrote letters, thanking her for reminding them of dignity. A high school invited her to speak about courage. Even the local union asked her to tell her story. Each time she resisted, saying, "I'm just a waitress." But slowly she began to realize that wasn't true. She was more. She had always been more. One night after the diner closed, Harper and Richard sat at the counter. The place was quiet, the jukebox humming faintly in the corner. Richard sipped his coffee, then asked, "Do you ever regret it, standing up that first day?" Harper thought of the fear, the humiliation, the viral storm that nearly drowned her. Then she thought of her mother, of Ethan, of the people who now walked into the diner with hope in their eyes. "No," she said finally, "because it reminded me that even the smallest voice can be heard, even in a world that doesn't want to listen." Richard nodded slowly. "You changed me, Harper, more than you'll ever know." She smiled faintly. "You changed yourself. I just refused to let you forget who you were." When spring came, the diner's neon sign flickered against a softer sky. Harper pushed open the windows, letting in the scent of rain. Her mother sat at a booth, healthier now, sipping tea with Ethan, who had taken more time off work to be with them. Richard walked in carrying boxes of books. "Donations," he explained, "for the community center down the street. Thought the diner might be a good drop-off spot." Harper helped him set them down, shaking her head with a smile. From billionaire to book courier, who would have guessed? Richard laughed, best job I've ever had. As the diner filled with the sounds of clinking cups and easy laughter, Harper looked around. The chaos had ended, but something new remained, a sense of healing, of quiet strength. The world hadn't become perfect, but in this little corner, dignity had won. Later that night, Harper stood outside, watching the lights of Manhattan shimmer in the distance. Richard joined her, his hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "for years I thought the measure of a man was how much he could take, how much he could own, but you showed me something else." "And what's that?" "That sometimes the cheapest meal can be worth the most." Harper smiled, her breath clouding in the cool air. "Funny, I've been saying that all along." They stood in silence, the city humming around them. Two people from different worlds brought together by eggs, toast, and truth. For Harper, it wasn't about fame or power. It was about healing, hers, Richard's, even Clara's in some distant way. The world was broken, yes, but people could choose to make it better. And in that moment, under the glow of the diner's neon sign, Harper believed that maybe, just maybe, they had.